Will come to order. This hearing is in virtual format. A few reminders as we begin. Once you start speaking, there will be a slight delay before you show up on the screen. And to minimize any background noise, please click the mute button until it is your turn to speak or to ask questions or answer questions. You should all have one box on your screens labeled clock that will show you how much time is remaining. For witnesses, you will have 5 minutes for your opening statements. For all senators, the 5-minute clock still applies for your questions. At 30 seconds remaining for your statements and for your questions, you'll hear a bell ring to remind you that your time has almost expired. It will ring again when your time has expired. If there's any kind of technology issue, we'll move to the next witness or the next senator until it is resolved. And to simplify the speaking order process, Senator Kennedy and I have agreed to go by seniority for this hearing. So with that, let's begin. Good afternoon and welcome to this year's first hearing of the Banking Committee's Economic Policy Subcommittee. And thank you to Ranking Member Senator Kennedy for working with me and with my staff to help make this a very successful hearing. This subcommittee has a mandate to examine the economy and how to make sure it works for all Americans. Given this mandate, there is no better topic for our first hearing than student loans and their impact on racial justice, on borrowers, and on the economy. The student loan debt burden is massive, and it affects millions of families. About 43 million Americans owe more than $1.7 trillion in student loans. That's an average of almost $40,000 per borrower. Student loan debt takes a real bite out of personal finances. It can mean that borrowers can't afford a new car or can't get a mortgage or can't launch a business or can't start a family. This hurts them individually, but it also hurts the whole economy. The burden is so heavy that when the pandemic hit, Republican and Democratic policymakers recognized that loan payments would just sink families. So first President Trump and then President Biden paused student loan payments and canceled accumulating interest. It was a smart move, but in a few months, those payments are scheduled to go up again. America is facing a student loan time bomb that, when it explodes, could throw millions of families over a financial cliff. The average borrower will have to start paying nearly $400 a month to the government instead of spending that money out in the economy. Student debt also makes racial disparities in America even worse. Compared with white students, Black and Hispanic students are forced to borrow more money to go to school, borrow more money while they're in school, and have a harder time paying off their loans after graduation. I'm just going to do one statistic around this. 20 years after taking out their student loans, median white borrowers owe about 6% of their original amount. The end is in sight. But after 20 years, median Black borrowers still owe 95% of the original amount they borrowed. Their path seems to stretch on forever. We can help. Leader Schumer and I have urged President Biden to address this economic problem by using his existing authority to cancel $50,000 in student debt for each borrower. New data I obtained from the Education Department reveals the benefits of debt cancellation. The data show that if we cancel $50,000 in student loan debt, 36 million borrowers would be completely relieved of their debt burdens. A significant number of these borrowers who would finally be free of student loan debt, 3.1 million people, have already been carrying their debt burden for over 20 years. It's time to act now. Republican and Democratic presidents have a long history of using their statutory authority to cancel student loan debt. President Obama used this authority to cancel all debt for tens of thousands of students. And President Trump used this authority to cancel some debt, accrued interest, for 37 million federal borrowers. Canceling $50,000 in student loan debt would also help close the black-white wealth gap among borrowers by 25 points. For Latinos, the gap would close by 27 points. This is the single most powerful executive action President Biden could take to advance racial equity and give everyone in America a chance to build a real future. So I want to thank all of our witnesses for coming today. I look forward to hearing your testimony. And with that, I'll turn to Ranking Member Senator Kennedy for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Looney. And now let's get to the questions. I recognize myself. I want to start by talking about the role that loan servicers play in our student loan system. Borrowers take out loans from the federal government to pay for school. And when it's time to collect, the government pays hundreds of millions of dollars to companies called loan servicers to manage the repayment process. Today, we have the CEOs of two of the largest loan servicers, Navient and FIA. Mr. Raimondi, your company, Navient, gets paid hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to service student loans. So I want to run through some of the highlights of Navient's record over the last decade. In 2013, the Department of Education's Inspector General found that your company, which was then called Sallie Mae, violated the terms of its contract by failing to report borrower complaints in its debt collection business. Is that correct? Mr. Raimondi?
Senator, I'd have to go look at the details of that back in that time frame, but
Okay.
Our job is obviously to comply with the rules and the laws, and we work very hard to make sure that we help all borrowers successfully manage their loans.
Okay, but this is a case where you didn't follow the rules, and I'll just enter that into the record, the actual report on that. In fact, in the last 7 consecutive Department of Education surveys, Navient has been dead last in borrower satisfaction. So I guess it's not a surprise if you wanted to hide consumer complaints. Let me ask this question differently. Attorney General Healy, you're one of the nation's leading consumer protection enforcers. You just heard the CEO of Navient say that they comply with the law. Is it your view that Navient does its best to follow the law and generally looks out for the interests of student borrowers?
Thank you, Chair Warren. The answer to that is no. And I think we've spent a lot of focus on forward thinking in terms of what needs to happen in terms of fixes. I support that as somebody who has done so many investigations and so many lawsuits and heard directly from borrowers who are actual people, not frogs in a pot, but actual people like the Deramir Perez's of the world coming to my office. I will tell you that we have received countless complaints about poor servicing practices. And, you know, you can blame Congress, you can blame the Department of Ed, you can blame for-profit schools, you can blame colleges and universities. The burden should not be on the borrowers, though, who repeatedly, through our investigations, both with respect to Navient and FIA, okay, were shown time and time again to have misled borrowers, to have made misrepresentations to borrowers, to have completely bungled up in catastrophic failures the way those loans were serviced, to the detriment of hundreds of thousands of borrowers. I spoke of the 200,000 of borrowers in Massachusetts affected by FIA alone. That's just one small story. And finally, with respect to Navient, just to remind folks, you know, the CFPB in investigation detailed and something that Navient reported, and I find it astounding. Their battle cry was to, quote, forbear them, make them relinquish the ball. Don't work with them on IDR, but just keep them going in these loans. And the second thing that Navient also represented in the past, arguing, quote, there is no expectation that the servicer, in this instance in Navient, will act in the interest of the consumer. That's a problem.
Thank you, Attorney General Healy. You know, in fact, we're not talking about a few isolated incidents. In fact, Mr. Raimondi, in 2016, 29 states investigated Navient for illegally, quote, paying call center workers based on how quickly they could get struggling student loan borrowers off the phone instead of actually helping them. You're currently being sued by 6 different states. In 2017, a federal audit found that Navient steered borrowers to repayment options that actually made it harder for them to pay back their loans so that call operators could save time and money. Navient even illegally overcharged the government for years to administer student loans to the tune of $22 million, but you've refused to pay it back for 8 years. So, Mr. Raimondi, if a person who worked at the Department of Education stole $22.3 million, they'd be fired. And if they were prosecuted for embezzlement, they could go to jail for 27 years. But Navient isn't a person, Navient is a contractor that never faces real long-term accountability. So can you explain why your government contracts haven't been canceled and why Navient has continued to reward you personally with nearly $40 million in compensation since 2014, even as these scandals pile up?
Well, Senator, some of these are allegations that are not true. And it's why one of the
I'll say
things,
they're
as I
all in
said,
public record.
no, they're accusations and not necessarily based on facts. But our goal is to help all borrowers, as I said, successfully manage their loans. And that's why my teams and I regularly listen to borrower calls. We're constantly making improvements to the way our programs work. We also deploy a very highly trained and caring team of professionals who help borrowers each and every day. And the results of this is that we are actually lead the industry in helping borrowers avoid default. And as you know, the devastating consequences that are associated with that. We we perform extremely well in enrolling borrowers in income-driven repayment plans. And we've used this insight that we gather from customers to be very innovative and develop new programs and solutions or processes that help more borrowers be successful. Recently, we rolled out an electronic e-sign program for income-driven repayment plans. And this was because we saw from our data and call listening that customers were having trouble completing the complex enrollment forms that are associated with income-driven repayment, 10 pages long, filled with jargon. And we took that system, developed an alternative, filled out the applications for them so that they would be accurate and complete, and sent them to them for electronic signature. We more than tripled the response rate. So very
Mr.
very
Raimondi,
performance.
I appreciate that. And I understand you're here to talk about the good things that your company has done. But you have been sued repeatedly and you have been found to owe money that you have refused to pay. And this has happened over and over. And as I said, in the last 7 surveys, Navient came in dead last in satisfaction among student loan borrowers. So I'm glad for you to stand here and paint a general picture, but Navient made more than $500 million last year profiting off a broken system. The federal government should absolutely fire Navient. And because this happened under your leadership, Navient should fire you. But the problem is bigger than that. More than 40 million borrowers are trapped in a rigged game. They're crushed by debt. They're hounded by servicers and debt collectors. It is a massive drag on our economy, and we need a new approach. Canceling $50,000 of student loan debt would free millions of people from the traps that Navient and other servicers have laid for them. Thank you. Senator Kennedy? I tell you what, I think Senator Menendez is almost here. So how about if I just start another round of questions, and when when I finish, we'll go to Senator Menendez if he's appeared by that point. Let me start with you, Mr. Steele. Taxpayers pay your company, FIA, to manage the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which we've heard a lot about here today. The program is supposed to forgive student debt for public servants, like teachers and nurses and members of the military, after 10 years. So far, about 225,000 people have hit the 10-year mark and applied for forgiveness, but a whopping 98% of them have been rejected. Now, no one should be let off the hook for the disaster that this program has turned into. But it is your job to ensure that people who have followed the rules get relief. The most common reason a borrower gets turned down is because your company says that they haven't made enough qualifying payments. But there are now multiple lawsuits and investigations that have found that you systematically undercount payments. Mr. Steele, just to take one example, the Education Department audits dating back to 2016 have shown that FIA's automated system creates errors and mistakenly disqualifies payments. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Senator. I do not believe that that is correct. You know, anytime we identify an issue, whether it's a regulator like the Education Department or through our own control procedures, we actively investigate it and we work to make it right for the borrowers.
So then I don't think I quite understand your answer. Are you saying the Education Department audits dating back to 2016 did not show that FIA's automated system created errors and mistakenly disqualified people? Or are you saying it did show that, but you fixed it afterwards?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the audit that you're speaking. It was prior to the time that I was in my current role.
This is multiple audits that we're talking about here. Well, let me try another question then. Let me turn this around again to Attorney General Healy. Mr. Steele says that he doesn't know about any problems at FIA. So let me ask you, Attorney General Healy, are these just isolated incidents, these audits that we've heard about? What has been your experience as you have investigated FIA?
Well, 5 years of investigation of FIA and other years spent investigating Navient. Both of these entities made a promise to the United States government that they could handle this work, as complex as they want to characterize it. And they failed miserably, and of course made boatloads of money for themselves in the interim, while borrowers are left high and dry. In our investigation specifically of FIA, what we found is that they repeatedly misinformed future teachers, firefighters, police officers, social workers, right? Because these were people who were looking to do public service work. They routinely misinformed them about the requirements of the program, about their status in it and whether they were qualified. They would delay processing applications. They would delay processing payments, which resulted in people being booted off in terms of eligibility. A question was posed earlier about fraud. I'll tell you all about fraud. It's why the Attorney General's office here and in other states have sued both of these entities for what we call unfair and deceptive practices to borrowers. FIA, for example, we found in our investigation was overbilling, double billing borrowers. The record is replete. As I say, we did enter into a civil settlement agreement with them. It is my hope and expectation that going forward with respect to both of these loan servicers, that the right measures be put in place. But the history through our investigation is loan servicing practices replete with deception to the severe, detriment of borrowers.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Attorney General Healy. You have the on-the-ground experience with FIA and with the other loan servicers. It seems clear to me that FIA presides over a so-called public service loan forgiveness program that has proven itself nearly incapable of ever actually granting public servants any loan forgiveness. Mr. Steele, has the Department of Education terminated your contract or penalized your company in any way for its errors and mismanagement that have prevented teachers and firefighters and other public servants from getting the debt cancellation that the law provided them?
Senator, I'd like to answer your question at first by saying no, they have not, but also note that the majority of the rejections that you note, the 200 and some thousand rejections, over 75% are simply because the individuals that applied for forgiveness had not been in the program for 10 years. Now, I didn't write that requirement. The United States Congress and the U.S. Senate wrote that requirement.
Well, let me stop you there, though, if I can, Mr. Steele, because that's the fundamental question. Are you counting accurately? Because that's the one thing the federal government asks you to do. And as I see it, I think what the data show is that 59% of ineligible public service loan forgiveness applications were denied because they did not have enough qualifying payments. Borrowers aren't filling out these applications for fun. They're filling them out because their understanding is they've been writing checks for 10 years or longer. This is a program that's now 14 years old. And you're telling me that you could only find the payments for 2% of them?
So, Senator, first, as I noted just a minute ago, the primary reason that these applications are rejected is because they have not been in repayment of a qualified direct loan for 10 years. So, and then in addition, I would like to note, with all the errors that have been referred to, particularly with respect to Massachusetts, there are 25 individuals spoken to in that settlement agreement. Over the years of the investigation, we serviced 250,000 individuals in the state of Massachusetts. You know, we strive day in and day out to do our best for the people of Pennsylvania, for the customers we service. We advocate on their behalf for program improvements to increase those forgiveness rates that you note. And ultimately, yes, the Massachusetts Attorney General did find 25 individuals and we worked to make those corrected. In fact, those individuals have already been corrected.
The investigations are not simply about a random error rate. They're about systematic undercounting. And when you undercount the number of payments, that means that people don't qualify for the programs. Let me just give Attorney General Healy a quick chance to reply. We're way over time here. But Attorney General Healy, would you like to respond?
You know, I'm trying to be constructive here because this is about a forward going, what do we need to do to fix the system? But I want to be very clear. We found systematic failures both with respect to FIA and with respect to Navient. There is a reason, Madam Chair, that FIA has agreed to do a loan by loan, borrower by borrower audit just with respect to 218,000 borrowers in Massachusetts. If that doesn't signal that they know they had a problem, that's just Massachusetts. I don't know what else does. So, you know, there's a point about accountability, and then there's a point about what's going to happen in terms of why debt cancellation is imperative. But for FIA to suggest that it had the capacity to, or even now maybe has the capacity to engage in that kind of borrower by borrower analysis and processing, the reason those people were ineligible many times was because FIA lost the records, wasn't keeping track. So by fault, they became, FIA created their ineligibility. And again, I think it's a shame for the borrowers who we're speaking of today.
And one of these investigations, I recall, said FIA left it up to the borrowers to figure out if there had been an error rather than FIA having to get it right to begin with and put its own processes in place. Look, Mr. Steele, I think that FIA has demonstrated that it can't administer this program. I think the Department of Education should terminate your contract. But I think we've also established that teachers and firefighters aren't going to be any better off with Mr. Raimondi over at Navient in charge. This is an utterly broken system, and the solution is not more complexity and more incompetent middlemen. The best way to deliver relief to public servants crushed by student loan debt is to cancel their debt, and not after 10 years of bureaucratic torture and miscounted payments, but just to do it now. Senator Menendez, I believe you're with us now.